What is going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to break down the RDLs, the Romanian deadlift. I'm going to take over 3 of the most common mistakes I typically see, and I'm going to tell you to correct them in 3 simple steps. Now, the deadlift is one of those movements where I think we get the most back pain from, right? At least for my experience as a coach, I tend to see people complaining like, oh, my back's hurting after a deadlift, especially an RDL. So we're really going to break it down for you today, and that way you can blow up your glutes and hamstrings with better technique, and more importantly, of course, staying injury-free the whole time. So, mistake number 1, I'm just gonna do maybe a couple of the weights here, but I'm gonna be demoing bad form, so I don't wanna just kind of blow my back out, so kind of bear with me here. But I'll just show you a couple reps here, the RDL. It will break down the mistakes. So, as most you know, the Romanian deadlift is just a hinge, and we're just pushing back and forth. And it's mostly a glute with a little bit of a hamstring dominant movement. So, mistake number 1, and then how to fix it. Again, let's pretend I have dumbbells here because I don't want to blow my back today. That wouldn't be ideal. Mistake number 1 I typically see is just moving too much to the back / going too low and not moving enough with the hips. By far the most common thing. I'll show you a couple bad reps here and I'll show you how to fix it. Now, the first thing we'll talk about is going too low. So let's say you're right about here. If I go lower, look at my lower back starting to arch at that bottom position, right? Or not arch, sorry, flex that bottom position. So this is the mistake I typically see. It's not when the technique is bad in terms of moving the hips. It's more just like you're going too low and you're seeing past range of motion and your lower back's got a lot more pressure because of that. Now, the best thing you can do is just go as far as your hips take you. Now, what I want you to look at here is look at my hips. I'll try to make it nice and tight here so you can see. Look at my hips. When I push back as far as I can going down, my end range is probably about here, right? So kind of this position. If I go any lower than this, notice my hips are gonna stay still, but it's my lower back that does the movement. So that's the first thing you gotta figure out is you gotta figure out where your range of motion is, because when the hips stop moving back, you know the only way going down is gonna be your lower back flexing. Now the second thing, this is kind of 1.5 mistake here, it's just not moving enough at the hips, right? So it just kind of looks like this, where the hips don't really move and the back does all the work. And it's super common with guys. I don't know why us guys can't figure out the hip hinge pattern, but it looks a lot kind of like that, where the hips don't really move too much, it's more lower back doing the work. A quick little drill you can do is get like a wall behind you or even a broomstick where you kind of get your head, your mid back and lower back, and you want to really work on pushing your hips back and extending forward. So if the wall's like a couple inches behind you and you don't feel it going down, it just means you're moving too much at your lower back. If you're obviously feeling the wall, it means you're moving enough with your hips and you're getting the right range of motion. So that's mistake number 1, 1.5. Number 1, of course, going a little bit too low. So make sure you just kind of go until your hips push back. And number 2, just make sure you are moving with the hips and you're not moving with your lower back. Now, the second mistake I typically see is usually the opposite. And for a lot of people, we go overextend. We overextend at the top position, and it's gonna look something like this. So you're coming here, the form's great, but you come up, and it just kind of shoots forward, and maybe you heard the cue, let's squeeze the glutes. So what you basically do is, you squeeze, and you kind of hyperextend at that top position. Now, there's a few different positions that are gonna cause back pain, but number 1, I would say is the back rounding, but number 2, for a lot of us as well, is your back extending. So if you have back pain when your back extends and you're coming out of the deadlift like this, well then you're triggering your pain. This is more of like a simple fix, I'd say, than the first one. Because the first one, again, could be like you're going too low or maybe you're just not moving to the hips. The second thing right here, let's say you're moving and everything looks great, is all I want you to do is think ribs down, core tight. Kind of get your ribs, or say your abs right here. Just kind of make sure this doesn't expand when you come up. If you kind of see when I come up, this is going to expand. This hand's a little bit farther away. You want to either keep it neutral or even slightly in. If you can't get that, and let's say you're still kind of arching, what I want you to do is just stop a little bit short with your range of motion. And this is what I do because I kind of live in that extended posture where I get that lower back arch. So what I typically do is I usually just kind of finish right about here where I'm not kind of fully extending. You might be like, oh, I'm missing out on glute gains. What do you think about it, guys? There's no tension at the top position of the deadlift, right? Like you can hold this position all day long. The most tension is in that mid to bottom range anyways. So if you stop about 10 degrees short and you're saving your lower back from pain, It's an absolute game changer right there. So that'd be my tip. Number one, of course, keep your core tight when you come up and really brace. But number two, if you still can't get that, you find yourself extending, then just kind of stop short a little bit of the range of motion, and that'll do the trick in terms of making sure your lower back isn't extending too much, and we're using our hips to extend and not our lower back to extend. Now, tip number three, mistake number three, and this one you can't really see too well with the naked eye, but it is a very common mistake, and that's just not bracing enough properly. So maybe your form's perfect, right? So maybe everything looks great, and you're like, oh, why is my back hurting now? I'm not rounding my back, I'm not extending my back, but I still get that pain in the lower back. It probably has to do with stability in your core, and I'm gonna teach you how to really brace here. But when you come down to deadlift, what I want you to do, or a squat, any sort of motion where you're doing a full body, lower body, full body, lower body, a lower body compound movement, I want you to hit 3-point stability. You're gonna push out here, and then push out a little bit back here. When you just kind of get a little bit of pressure here, we want to create what's called an intra-abdominal pressure. We want to make sure we're stabilized through our core. Think of like a pop can, right? If the pop can is like just kind of like here and it's not really kind of enough air in it, you can crush it pretty easy, but if you expand and you brace, it's gonna be a lot harder to pop that can. It's the same thing now with your core, right? So what I want you to do is, again, if I'm coming down, I'm pushing out here, and I'm maintaining that brace throughout the range. And if you need a reset after every rep, that's fine, you can do that, but I'm keeping pressure here, and even a little bit back here. No, it's not just sucking in, right? So maybe you heard the term hollowing, excuse me. What you don't want to do is kind of suck like that and then go, because you're not creating pressure around the spine. You're more just kind of sucking your stomach, which is really not a great method. It's been proven to stabilize your lower back. So again, you're pushing out here, you're bracing, you're coming back up. Let's say like you might be thinking like, how hard do I brace? You want to be able to breathe a little bit when you're bracing. So what you don't want to do is like that, where you almost feel like you're gonna pass out. You should be able to breathe a little bit when you brace, just kind of right here, and going back and forth. And that should be the best thing for you in terms of find that hybrid between bracing, but also not suffocating yourself. And not to say you have to breathe during the rep, but you can just kind of like stabilize a little bit, but just make sure you're not like that, if that makes sense. So you can still just kind of brace without kind of taking gas for air obviously during the rep. I wouldn't recommend that, but just make sure, like I said, you're keeping that brace the whole time, and you're either breathing a little bit, or you're just keeping tight the core, and you're coming up and getting that breath at that top position. So the 3 common mistakes to recap. Number 1, we're going too low, or we're not moving the hips enough, so it just kind of looks something like that. Not a pretty deadlift, right? The second thing is just kind of overextending with the lower back. So the key to fix there is core tight, or just limit the range of motion. And the third thing is bracing. Remember, keeping tight here, keep it out here, create the intra-abdominal pressure throughout the whole range of motion, and your lower back should thank you, and you'll get better glute and hamstring development because of that. Hope this is helpful. If you guys liked it, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We got one foreign video we're gonna do every single week, and other video we'll kind of talk about losing, stuff about that, add lean muscle, add more strength, all the fun stuff. So we'll talk soon, and thanks so much for tuning in.